Welcome back. Welcome in. This is Country Roads Confidential at earsports.com. It's a Paramount podcast. I am Mike Casaza. That is Chris Anderson. Annual game, West Virginia against an FCS opponent. Chris, stop me if you've heard this. The Mountaineers have never lost to an FCS team. 24-0, like I said. I believe the notes have them as 21-0 against current teams from the FCS. That's because I'm guessing a couple have moved up. James Madison? I don't know who the other one would be, but never lost, rarely threatened. Games are usually not in danger. And even last year, kind of got interesting against Duquesne, but I wouldn't call that a threat. I think that was probably having to put in a little bit more work than expected, literally, because they had the weather delay. Not sure what to expect this time from the U Albany Great Danes. Not sure how much I'm going to like typing that all week either. Formidable program based on last season's success. Didn't have a whole bunch of success before that. Respected coach and coaching staff. Kind of interesting where they've built their program we can get into. Do not expect 1-24 on Saturday night.
Mike, I'd appreciate it if you put some respect on that. I believe it's the number 13 Great Danes in the country, number 13 in the FCS. I believe that was in an email the other day. Preseason number 16. Um, Moved up after their week one game, which I guess we can touch on in a second. Tough win over Long Island University, who West Virginia is familiar with. We played the Sharks a couple years ago. It's not This Albany team's not. I don't think this Albany team is what people think it is. Again, regardless of how good you are at FCS, a decent FBS team should handle business without much issue. I'm not certain Albany's, you know, a top 15 FCS team right now either, based off of what we saw in week one and what they've lost and what they have coming back, which again we can touch on real quick.
I believe they're the third highest ranked team in their conference too. So
Mm.
could be a tricky season for them. Yeah, worst West Virginia teams have beaten better FCS teams than what we'll see on Saturday. That said, team that has I don't know won at a high level last year probably isn't very happy with the way last week went. It's really a slow start, trailing in the second half of that game. Just not what they wanted, especially for so much new stuff. Might have been rocky. You worry about, I don't know, you evoke a bunch the fact that they'll be better in between their first and second week, so on and so forth. No idea what type of a difference that's going to make. I don't expect much. That's it. It won't be a bunch of stiff jerseys out there. It'll be a good thing for West Virginia to get out there and work out some aggression, never mind some kinks, and get to where they want to go. It's just, man, I just don't know if this is what anybody wants right now, especially with Pitt looming. You have so much anticipation for that West Virginia Penn State game, and you have that Pitt game on the other end, and you have this in between, which is just kind of like a necessary evil, beautiful distraction, whatever you want to call it. Not sure how beautiful it'll be, but you got to get over this one, and this is where it's dangerous, Chris. Win, fine, but there's like a style points involved here too. And I'm not sure where I'm at on West Virginian style points right now. I think they could rack up a bunch of points. I'm not sure their defense is going to be like 85 Bears or 2000 Ravens anytime soon, but you'd like to see something, I would say, similar to what you saw for stretches on Saturday. I don't think the defense is terrible on Saturday. It's going to hit with some big plays. They can improve it. I don't know what's good enough. Is an A really an A? And is a B really a B, or will that turn into like a C or a D because the competition, this is going to be in the eye of the beholder. And God bless us after the game if this isn't an absolute blowout, right?
No kidding. But I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you took that angle there because that kind of leads me into where I think we're probably going to spend most of our time here on this podcast. Um, because I think we both can agree when West Virginia plays an FCS team, what we are looking at, what fans are looking at, what coaches are looking at, what media is looking at is more about West Virginia than anything it has to deal with the other team on the other side. It's just that's an FCS opponent. Focus on what happened with West Virginia and what they're doing and who is doing that. So can we go there first? Because I was going to say, let's say two-thirds of the podcast is going to be about that, and maybe a third of it's or less is going to be about Albany. No offense to the Great Danes.
Sure.
But you want to go there first?
Let's do it.
Because I got a little exercise for you.
Yeah, by the way, it is 21 and 0 and 24 and 0. They played JMU three times. I forgot about the one way back in like 2004. I remember the one in I mean 19 Brown's first game, and then they played at FedEx in 2000. They played an FCS team at FedEx in 2012 too. And then 2000 it's before the Sugar Bowl. I'm pretty sure it's either 03 or 04, but I want to say 04. So three times they played JMU. Go on.
Was
Sorry.
no, no, no. Hold on, real quick. Sidetrack. If you remember, that was early on. I wasn't focused on any of that when I was just getting started with this. Was that 2012 neutral site game with Jamie? Was that part of a bigger contract that they did? Was it like, hey, we get a home game and a neutral site game, or was it just a here's a one-off, we're getting a big paycheck from FedEx?
Yeah, they got a promoter that wanted to put on games at FedEx Field, and that was about that time where they were trying to get those one-offs in NFL stadiums, and there was money to be made. There still is, and it was really popular. And then West Virginia said, "Wait a minute, payday! I only have to go to FedEx, and you schedule a win here." And JMU's like, "Wait a minute, payday! I only have to go to FedEx, and we get to play West Virginia in DC." It just worked out really well. I want to say the promoter was somehow aligned with Dan Snyder. Was Dan Snyder friendly? I'm not making any accusation here, but there was some logistics behind it that made sense. But that was a one-off non-conference neutral site game between an
You
FBS
be
and
careful
FCS.
saying somebody's friends with Dan Snyder. That'll get you in trouble. Okay,
Uh,
so be careful.
business associate, business
There you go.
adjacent. Let's say. How about that? They knew each other. They
There you
had the
go.
business cards of the other person.
All right. Well, let's get started on this then, and let's go back to that JMU game that you said was Neil Brown's first game because we'll go oldest to newest. And
Okay.
I went back and looked. I kind of racked my brain on a couple of these, trying to think of it myself without having to look at box scores, without having to look at stats and PFF grades. But because, like I said, we're looking at this going, hey, what can you learn about West Virginia? And then it was, can you learn anything about West Virginia when it played the FCS team? So I looked at the FCS games during the Neil Brown era, picked out a couple of the things that were, I would say, were takeaways, things maybe we didn't know or we kind of thought heading into the game that, and then, did that end up being true? Did it just happen
Okay.
because it was FCS, or was it true long term? Was it sustainable? Was it repeatable? Um, 2019 JMU, a big takeaways. Here's what I wrote down. West Virginia's run game sucks. Sorry for the, I believe that was a professional term. Got that from journalism school, thesaurus. Um,
I think you get to use that like three times a season at most, and you rolled it. I mean, because like it's such a strong word that evokes like
yeah.
me laughing and other people going, "Oh my God, you can't say that." To bust out the first game against an FCS season, and to be completely providential too. Kudos. That's brave, but also very, very accurate too.
And, they were terrible in that game. That was against JMU, which again, I think we later found out was a very good JMU team that was getting ready to transition to FBS. Well, they could not run the ball. They couldn't. I don't even think they averaged 2 yards per carry against JMU in the first game, despite returning, I believe it was like Petaway and Brown and a couple guys that had experience in FBS football and had, some kind of success. That turned out to be true because 2019 West Virginia's run game ranked dead last out of all of FBS in yards per carry. So that was something we could take from that.
We saw what a
Darius,
good FCS team looked like too. That's the
yeah,
best FCS team that West Virginia's seen. West Virginia's seen some bad FCS teams too, even recently and on this list. That was the best one. They were number two in the country. I want to say the entire season because that North Dakota State team was great. But you could tell Signetti had something going there. They had FBS players in their team like before the phenomenon became, bouncing down there. They had really good players. I mean, like pros in that team. You could tell they were going to be good. And they made that a good game. Like that was a competitive
yeah,
game because West Virginia was so new and so strange, but also like that team was good.
yeah. And I think to your point of new and strange, that there's not many more things I really took from that first one through because it was a tight game, low scoring, not a lot of stats. Josh Chandler Semedo,
Mhm.
I thought after that, I think he was, according to PFF, had 13 tackles in that game. And he ended up racking up a lot of tackles at West Virginia. The Stills brothers were great. I think most people already kind of thought that going into the game. So I didn't have many other things that I took from 2019 JMU. Do you remember anything from that game where you're like, oh man,
That was a Tevin Bush game, if I remember correctly. He
he
was
had a
using
couple of
like
nice games, yeah, plays. I mean,
a bunch of gadget plays like, okay, here's this, there's a part, he's neither running back nor receiver. Can they do something with him? And that was probably one of the last days you could say, wow, they got something here. And I want to say they used like Kennedy McCoy a bunch because they couldn't run the ball, but they had a talent there. There was something with him. They wanted to figure out how to use him. He probably had, 6 or 8 catches, not a lot of yardage, but you could tell like they knew they were hamstrung in the running game, but they also had some running backs who had talent. Maybe Petaway was their leading rusher that day too, if I'm trying to remember here. But they
20
had something
yards.
with, and then it just didn't work. They were going to have to reinvent the wheel using their running backs, not running the ball.
Yeah. Martell Petaway, 9 carries, 20 yards, leading rusher, 24 carries for 34 yards total in that game.
Bad.
Not great.
Hmm.
Yeah, to your point, Tevin Bush, 4 catches for 74 yards, was used in a return game a little bit too. So he was like you said, a little gadget guy that they thought maybe they could do something. 2020, Eastern Kentucky, obviously thrown off a little bit with COVID. Canceled. They had to change the schedule around because I believe that was the year West Virginia was supposed to open with Maryland. Is that right? They had to can
Yes. No, no, no. They were
they
supposed to play Florida State and Atlanta.
Florida State, and then also play Maryland, I believe.
Yes.
And then because both of the non-conference FBS games were canceled, only one FCS warm-up game for the Big 12. Um, First takeaway, run game was back, baby.
Yeah.
329 yards, over 6 yards a carry. Do you remember if that was true or not long term for the rest of the year?
It was better. It wasn't the worst in the country, but it was still a bottom, man,
Yeah.
I want to say bottom quarter, bottom 20%.
94th in the country in
Yeah.
yards per carry for the year. And that included, that number of over 6 yards per carry against FBS teams. They only averaged 3.33. So not repeatable. Um, Going through, I think that was that the Tony Fields game? Well, yeah, I think he only played 25 snaps and had 10 tackles. Um, yeah, that was a sign of things to come. Alonzo Adai, his first career start was very good. Had a highlight reel interception, a bunch of big plays, graded out tops on PFF. He ended up being excellent that year. If next year wasn't as quite as good. Was there anything else you took from that game that you were like, hey, and it did or did not follow?
We weren't ready for college football, I don't think. Remember how what a mess Eastern Kentucky was?
Yeah.
Like a lot of their team just wouldn't practice because they were worried about safety and precautions. And that was like the FCS, like some that didn't play, like they had the Ivy Leagues didn't play. It was man, and then they were just kind of sacrificial lambs. They were practice sleds basically, and it was 56-10. But I mean that team didn't know how to come out in the field. It was kind of like choppy trying to figure out what to do. That struck me as like, man, are they doing this? Um, that was the time that I bought a whole bunch of Quibi stock, Chris.
My
Seemed great
God,
at
I
the
forgot
time.
about that.
Um, I thought Alex Sinkfield was going to be a guy like that
Yeah.
guy just for different coaching staffs and different years. That's a player who was just twitchy, looked different. They could find a way to use him. And I was not burned by the Devin Bush experiment. I didn't buy any of that stock, but like I was like, oh, Quibi, tell me more. Short stories by highly as big as names. He had a great game, and I was like, this is going to be it. And then it just became the Letty Brown show. I'm pretty sure at the end of the year. I don't think Sinkfield ever had another game even remotely like that. I'm trying to think if he got hurt that year though. I don't quite remember. And then I just thought quarterback can't be an issue this year because you remember 19 ended with Daggy playing some games and everybody was
Yep.
pumped about that because he looked good at the end of the season. He won the starting job. I would say Kendall was serviceable as a backup, if not as a starter. Then you can get something quality out of him as a sage, kind of athletic, highly regarded recruit who hadn't lost it, just wouldn't help by his receivers so much his first year and his offensive line his first year. But they also had Garrett Green and they got in some packages and it was kind of sneaky how they used him. And I just thought this has got to be more of a difference maker this year. They're going to do something offensively above and beyond they did last year, partly because they had kind of like this year, some running back receivers who played were older and back. You're thinking James, Wheaton. Oh, I have a story I'll share in a second here. Um, Simmons was back, I think, too, right?
Hmm.
Was that the game where everybody was suspended for the start, though?
Oh, was that the season opener? That was the game where 11 players were
Yeah.
suspended before the start of the game. Okay.
Which, all right, that'll get me to my story. Okay. So they had some receivers who were back and better. They had some running game. The offensive line was a little bit better. I just kind of thought that quarterback wouldn't be a hindrance, and I'm not sure how true that was. Now, yeah, if that's the game, I'm pretty sure it was. There was a locker room team ritual that kind of got out of hand, and some players had to be suspended for the start of the game. Actually, maybe even the full game now that I think of it. But Sam Brown played in that game, and I'm pretty sure he got in trouble the night before the game. And he went
Yeah.
out there and caught passes and played in that game. Everybody's like, holy cow, this guy's got something here. And obviously it didn't work out for him. But I just thought it was strange that here's a guy gets in trouble, plays, and you had a number of, I think 11 players were suspended for that game. It was unusual.
It is that game, and here's the list: T.J. Simmons, starter;
Okay.
Junior Uzebu, starter; Chase Barrett, starter; and then backups: Isaiah Esdale, Zach Dobson, Michael Laughlin, T.J.
Dobson.
Banks, Tariq Stewart, Zach Davis, J.P. Hadley, and David Vincent McCauley.
Do you think like Zach Davis and JP Hadley were like peer pressured?
Yeah, I'm just like I. This is just a very odd combination of players because it's all the different classes, senior down to freshman.
Yeah.
It is literally all over the field. I mean, I think it's everything except quarterback and running back. You got somebody there. Walk-ons, scholarship players, guys from Maryland, guys from Florida, guys from Missouri. Like this is just an eclectic group here, bunched together, doing Lord knows what to get suspended there.
I think that they probably like went low hanging fruit and they brought like JP Hadley in and they said, listen, JP, tell us the truth. Otherwise, you're suspended. And he said, you know what, coach, I'm a team guy. Suspend me. And they said, fine, give me Zach Davis. Zach Davis, tell me what happened or I'm going to suspend you. Coach, suspend me. And it went all the way to the top to like JT or TJ Simmons and like, you know what, coach, suspend me. Team building, Chris. That should have been a sign that great things were on the horizon for this team.
There you go. And to your point about quarterback play, Jarrett Diggy in that game, his first season opening start. He had obviously played the previous year a couple games, as you noted. 19 to 25 for 228, three touchdowns, no interceptions with a PFF mark of 93.1.
Hmm.
I wouldn't say that was long term true, but he wasn't terrible that year. That was the year it wasn't quite as prolific of an offense. Obviously only playing 10 games, but 14 TDs, four interceptions. So kind of, let's not try and find the right middle ground here of not saying terrible, not bad, not great, somewhere in the
Yeah.
middle.
But it shouldn't have been an issue that year. And honestly, like I want to say the next game against Oklahoma State, he was pretty good. And that was a weird game that ends, obviously in just strange situations. A fumble gets returned for a touchdown. They have the ball late and just doesn't work out. But then I want to say that he began to kind of the more that people saw him, the more they knew what to do with him. And he wasn't very good against Baylor, which went to overtime, I believe.
Yeah.
And then his career just kind of became what it was, where maybe a little underrated, maybe not supported by the talent around him. Neil Brown would tell you that, but also did not elevate the talent around him and did not get above whatever ratings were placed on him.
2021, the Long Island University Sharks. I had three things written down to take from that game. Sorry, microphone went out there. Garrett Green is a rusher. This might work.
Hmm.
98 yards, two touchdowns. I would say that eventually became true. Um, Winston Wright is an unbelievable return man. In case you forgot, the previous game was when he
Yeah.
had, what was it, two different returns of like 90 plus yard. One was a 98 yarder where he didn't score a touchdown against Maryland, and then had a 90 yarder for a touchdown in this one, another big one. It's like 300 some yards of kickoff returns in five quarters. And then in the other remaining 10 and a half games or 10 and three quarters games, had 300 yards of kickoff returns. So not sure that's true. And finally, this defense might have potential. Gave up 30 points against Maryland, but some of that, for those who recall, was due to issues on offense, turnovers, special teams, all that stuff. But the defense pitched a shutout and held Long Island to 95 yards. Eventually, they would end up 37th in total defense, 44th in scoring. So pretty true, I guess. What did you take from that 2021 game?
That like West Virginia should write that game off as a charitable donation on its taxes because there was no reason they should have played that game. That team was, I think, up from what, Division 2,
Yeah,
something
they
like
were
that.
very recently in FCS. Yes.
Yeah, so like that's there should be like a transition period before you got to go play a Power 5 team. It was that was an absolute mismatch. There were players on that team who I don't even know what type of high school players they were, but they weren't ready for college. They were not ready to go up against some of the players on West Virginia. And it wasn't like West Virginia was like Alabama or Georgia or Clemson. It was just that the mismatch physically was there. Um, that's just one where I was like, what are we doing with these FCS games? Like, are you just getting one that'll take the check? I understand Youngstown State, a Duquesne, or Robert Morris, a name like a Youngstown State or a JMU, a regional team like a Duquesne or a Robert Morris. What are we doing with LIU and to some extent Albany too? I understand Albany had some success last year, but like when this game was signed, they won 5 games in 2 years, Chris, and it looked like they were going to be just kind of a program. Just what's the formula for getting FCS teams here and who you're playing and why? Like it was weird when West Virginia played Youngstown State twice in like 4 or 5 years. Youngstown State was a good program. They had a Pelini in charge, Chris.
Yep.
Pelini. Um, and it's local. It's a cool thing for some of the guys from Ohio. But you're playing Long Island University. Are you recruiting like Shaolin and Staten Island? Like, what are you doing? You're not like, when's the last great player that came from like there? Like, I don't know because they just took a check and they would play Eastern Kentucky. All right, there's some connection there, like Appalachia. Okay, this one just didn't make any sense, and I was like, if you're gonna do this, if you can't find a team, then get like an FBS that's not gonna be very good. Get like a group of five from like some small conference that's supposed to be at the bottom, and like, is that hard to schedule 1 year out, 2 years out? I don't know. Um, get a team that isn't gonna make you do a 2-for-1 or anything like that, but. That's more of like my armchair athletic administrator thing, which is why I'm in the armchair and not in like the actual suite. But other than that, I have almost no recollection of that game. I couldn't even tell you like starters. I know no one scored for LIU. I couldn't tell you who was their best player, what went on with that team. I'm gonna guess they went like maybe 0-12, maybe 1-11. I'm not sure. What is the legacy of the 22 LIU Sharks?
I don't know. Let me see if I can pull it up here.
Oh,
So 2021, Long Island University went 2-8 with wins over
hey.
Central Connecticut and Wagner. So
That wasn't the opener either, right? Okay, that was the second
no,
game.
no, no. That was later. Like both of them came in October. They had
I meant I
back-to-back
meant for West
wins.
Virginia. I meant for West Virginia because you said
No, it
Maryland.
was week two, right? Yeah, Maryland was week one.
Did they have a
But
long kick return in that game?
who? Long Island?
Long Island, yeah.
Let's see here. Pull up the box score. Long Island kick returns. He had 25 yarder.
Okay. Yeah.
That was it. Um, yeah, I mean they didn't do anything. Their longest play was 13 yards. So, but you said you couldn't remember this one. I can't remember the next year, so I'm really gonna need your help on this one. Do you remember who they played in 2022? I mean, I got to write it
22?
down and everything, but yeah,
22. Oh, that's the team that had the long kick return. That was Towson, right?
Towson, 2000. I don't know if they had a long kick return. I can check that too, but I this is like wiped from my memory. It was a blowout. I believe West Virginia won 65-7, something like that. I think I know why it's wiped from my memory because we were probably like, hey, we're not even going to bother with a preview of Towson because West Virginia just had an agonizing loss to Pitt and then just lost in double overtime to Kansas. So Mike's firing up the hot board and it's time to get going here. Um, so I don't recall anything about this Towson game at all.
Yeah.
And I went back, checked my notes, I looked at the stats, and I'm just like, only thing I wrote down was they averaged 7+ yards per carry and scored 6 touchdowns. That ended up not really being true. I mean, the run game wasn't bad, but it had certainly fallen off by the time you got later in the year. So, um,
That was
but yeah,
I'm pretty
96 yard kick return.
by a guy who might have played professionally, like one of their good players. I'm trying to remember who, but yeah. And then that was like the first season, the season with JT Daniels, and like I was just curious because he was just you could tell after the first two press conferences, like he swore in one, but like he said we got to stop doing dumb stuff, and then he took the Kansas loss pretty hard, but. I was wondering, like, if his team is going to be something, do something, they're going to have to be pretty businesslike and efficient here. I think he played deep into the game, and they did what they're supposed to do there. But again, kind of empty calories there too. That was the last season for Towson's coach, who was there for quite some time, and then the coach there now is this is how much how crazy I am. If I ever did put together hot boards that year, Chris, and you're trying to think outside the box a little bit and look at guys, and I can't remember his name. That's how
Randy
much it matters.
Edsall's. Oh, yeah.
No, no, no. But the coach of West Florida, which is like a
Oh, okay.
Division two juggernaut, really good. And I was like, yeah, maybe you can't take me FBS. But like, hey, here's the thing to think about. Like, just this kind of like from right field thinking. He's the coach at Towson now. That's how
Hmm.
far away the FBS is from Division two football, or Group of Five is from Division two football. He took the Towson job, and I want to say Rob Ambrose is the was the coach there now. I know that name. I don't know the UWF coach, but remember that UWF team is a sweet facility. It recruits really well. They were like just a powerhouse in Division two, and that's the guy who runs Towson now. So if you're trying to get a team in the schedule in the future, West Virginia, that team from Baltimore, where historically you've done pretty good recruiting and visiting, maybe you get Towson on the schedule again soon.
All right. So moving on to last year, which my memory is okay of last year. I can remember that.
Mhm.
Um, Two standouts,
Okay.
I think pretty obvious. Jaheim White, who played 0 snaps in the opener against Penn State, gets 12 carries, goes for 110 yards.
Hmm.
That was certainly a sign of things to come. Hudson Clement gets 5 catches for 177 yards and 3 touchdowns and gets put on scholarship after the game. Now, you and I had a discussion in our rapid reactions about that very thing. And I said, Mike, over under 2.5 more touchdowns for Clement the rest of the way. And I took under hard. I was writing it off as a one-time thing. Now, proved to be true with the under on the touchdowns, but I think it's unfair to say it was a one-time thing. I think he's been a reliable receiver. He hasn't duplicated that kind of success yet. It took another 10 weeks to get another 177 yards. But how would you rate that? Would you rate that as true, false, misleading? It, was that the real Hudson Clement that we saw in that game?
Has he scored since? Yeah,
One,
Houston, right?
one touchdown. Yeah.
Houston. How do you forget
Yep.
that one? Don't want to lose my head on that. Um, I think there's a lot left to be proven there.
Yep.
You can be desirous of a story like this to work, and you could say he's had all the great workouts and offseason stuff. You do have to produce, and you've got to get in the field and distinguish yourself from the other people who can take snaps, catches, and scores from you. I'm not sure that's happened yet, and it's not to be hard on him, but that's part of the game here, though. You're a scholarship athlete on a Power Four team. You kind of have to have a starting spot and hold off the guy behind you who might have been brought in to replace you or compete with you. That's just the nature of it. I'm not sure that's happened. There are a lot of people to catch passes right now too, out of the backfield at tight end, never mind at receiver. So that is difficult. This is a running team too, and he did get hurt last year, and he wore that for a while. Ability and availability are oftentimes the same thing. So if you're not healthy, you're not out there, you're not able to catch passes, and maybe physically his body wasn't ready for the rigors of a season. Um, I just do think he has a knack for getting open. That was apparent last year, whether it was short stuff or open stuff. You can look at you can look at certain stats and figure out, all right, his average depth of target is here, and his average yards per catch is here. That means he's getting open, he's doing things. That's fine. I'm just not sure he has the best rapport with the quarterback because it seems like Preston Fox is his guy, Garrett Green. I think that he's not a red zone target because he's not as big as a Jaden Bray or a Justin Robinson, but they're also not on the field, and sometimes Clement is. I don't know what he does exceptionally well that's going to distinguish him from that group. So, I was certainly out over my skis in that first game, but I was just thinking this guy looks different than everybody else does, and he did. It just didn't work out that he was catching passes in the end zone that year.
So, was there anything else from that Duquesne game that you remember like standing out to you and then ended up being true or not true down the road?
I had tickets to a Niners Steelers game the next day, and I had to leave very early in the morning, and I was livid during the weather delay because this is a stupid game that starts at 6 p.m. What are we doing here, right?
Yes.
And then it went longer than normal. I don't know why we start these FCS games at 6 p.m. West Virginia gets to pick, so that's up to them. I get that as a tradition now. Kudos, I like tradition. That's college football, but boy, I was mad about that. And then I just think that like I just did not like what I saw in the early going because that was the defense again. And you're looking at the defense that did kind of get picked apart at times on just catch and run stuff against Penn State, and it was happening again. We think about that, but like that game wasn't close. It wasn't. Once West Virginia got going, it was fine. It got a little bit like hindered because of the slow start, and Duquesne kind of took the air out of it, did score, but it wasn't like they were down 17-3 or 14-0. It was like I think 7-0 briefly. I don't even remember the score and the outcome there in the early going, Chris, but it wasn't like you weren't like pulling your hair out going, this team stinks, sucks, if you will. Just like, how is this happening? Like this team should be better than this, and they were that day. And you're just thinking, all right, is Clement for real? That was one thing, and then is how much of a bombs away attitude will this offense have? And I'm not sure that was on the forefront of anybody's mind at that time, but that was just one thing you look at that game
Ooh,
and say, well,
good
they
one.
really aired it out. Sure, FCS opponent, FCS defensive backs, but one of those FCS defensive backs is on West Virginia's roster this year, so it was not like it was a team that didn't have talent. They won their conference, made the playoffs, so that wasn't a team that didn't have talent. Had we known then what we know now, you might have believed more in the vertical passing of this team last year.
Yeah, you're right about this start. 7-0. I believe that like Duquesne started with the ball. I'm looking at here. It's not really showing up on the box score, but I think that was they punted it away
Yeah.
and West Virginia botched it, the return. Duquesne got it back and scored a couple plays later. I remember that just like you said, catch and run, 38-yard touchdown, and Duquesne goes up 7-0. And then by halftime, it's 35-10. So it is what it is. But you're right. There were the signs there of a couple holes in the defense. So overall, over the last few years, we came up with 13 things that we kind of stood out, a player that stood out, something that stood out, like a theme that stood out from these FCS games. Eight, eight and a half of them turned out to be true moving
Hmm.
forward. Does that surprise you? Think
That
from
we're
our time,
wrong,
maybe it's eight, huh?
that we make mistakes, and we're wrong on a couple of our reads. Are
No,
you
no, no.
counting
Like
Alex Sinkfield?
no, just no. I didn't count Alex Ingfield as one, but I'm talking about that something happened in that game that stood out. Not that we actually thought it. Like I don't know if we actually thought that Alex Sinkfield was the second coming of Steve Slayton, but that something stood out from this FCS game. Did it turn out to be true or not in the long term of that season?
Yeah, it would seem to me just by reviewing this in my head as you're talking that we've been a lot better or more aware of West Virginia at that stage, and then some exits down the road, what that will look like these past 3 years, and we're the first two, and that's just natural with like a base of experience that grows and your knowledge of the team. So probably fewer surprises and more of the that's not going to mean anything, or this might be something that does add up, which probably brings us to our point here that we're going to talk about. What did we get Saturday against Towson? We'll see, but yeah, that's not terribly surprising. Probably encouraging for me.
Yeah. Well, here you go. So after the game, we'll remember this, and you and I will take a couple of the things that happened in that game, and we'll each pick one that we think is actually legitimately going to continue to happen moving forward.
Okay, that's good.
Because I think we could probably find one, one apiece. Um,
Let me ask
we
you
got
this:
about four. Yeah, yeah.
worst FCS, not team, worst FCS game, and you can define a worst however you want.
So I
I got
mean,
mine for you.
I
2014 William and Mary. That was a
yeah,
bad FCS team that almost beat Dana.
that was the worst showing ever that I can remember West Virginia ever having against an FCS team. The worst time I did not enjoy, like you said, and I didn't even have NFL tickets for the next day. Did not enjoy the 6 p.m. start time and then an elongated weather delay uh, for a blowout that drove me nuts. Um, and I'm with you what you said earlier. One of the worst teams that I've ever seen step on the field with West Virginia. I mean, I wasn't around when they played, like College of Arts and Design from Ohio or whatever,
Mm,
but that LIU team was just atrocious.
bad.
So,
All right, let's do thumbnail Albany. From what
yep,
you have like a brief amount of time here, which is probably suitable. Um,
yes.
Nothing against them, but I think probably more of the attention is on West Virginia for the people listening. What do you know? What should people know? You have the floor, and then I'll steal it from you at the end.
Okay. Um, Terrible showing in week one. They got outgained, they got out timed, out everything against LIU and got a fumble return for a touchdown. LIU missed a field goal. I don't want to say they were lucky to win, but that was not a pretty start to their season. They do have a couple pieces on offense that I find intriguing. I mentioned it when I did my preview a couple weeks before the start of the season. It was 3 weeks away from the start of the season, and they hadn't even updated their roster on their official site. Um, so I was taking a guess that Miles Burkett was going to start at quarterback, the transfer from Wisconsin. He did. Not a great day for him. I'm interested about their slot receiver, uh, he switched over from running back, Seven McGee. He actually originally committed to Oregon, was ranked the number 31 running back by us at 24/7 Sports, but much, much higher by some of our competitors, including, I believe, a 5-star rating from someone. Um, Started at Oregon, ended up at Jackson State, hasn't done much in his career, had a nice game as a slot receiver last week. Keep an eye on him. And then their running back was a freshman All American for the FCS last year, Griffin Woodell. Um, just, they have a couple pieces that might be able to make some plays. I'm not going to say that it'll be a challenge for West Virginia, but at least some of these guys on defense are going to have to be awake and ready to play.
Yeah, watch Jamal Cooney. I don't know what the deal is with him. He was in the Ivies. He was an okay player. He didn't play football last year. He's a return guy for them that starts at receiver. Didn't get a catch, but averaged 30 yards a return last week. He's been an all-conference returner before. I wanted to get him involved as a slot guy who can do some things. Offensive line, Neil Brown said 3 guys who can play in the Big 12. They're returners, but that's interesting because that's going to be a thing for West Virginia's defensive line, the practice and reps that they absolutely need. They average over 310 for their starting offensive line, Chris. And one guy's 280. So 4 of the guys are pretty hefty. Defense, who knows? They lost 10 starters and then one returning starter re-injured a wrist that cost them most of last season. So they're just starting from scratch on defense. You should be able to do what you want to do and maybe even pick your number. What's funny about this team, Chris, is that they lost so many players, and I think similar to West Virginia, when you think about transfers and reloading, they've kind of done that. They've gotten a lot of FCS teams, players from FCS teams. They have like Group of Five and Power Five players, but like their Power Five quarterback transfer is the backup from Auburn, and it's a guy I hadn't even heard of before. So they kind of like West Virginia go out and get Group of Five teams or like fringe Power Five, similar to what they're doing, which means those are guys who've been probably good, maybe all conference or starter level players at the FCS level, which should be good enough at that level if you put them together and you coach them up. So by conference season, they should be pretty good. Um, Not Saturday. And then they'll see some good teams in their schedule soon, after West Virginia, of course, but like they have a tough schedule. I mentioned that like they play some of the better teams in the CAA this year, but they're going to play at Idaho next week. That is no fun. Idaho gave a scare to Oregon last week and was a playoff team last year. So there's a chance that that could be a fun game, that it could also be a telling one for them. Um, they want to get better, but they have a lot of things on the horizon, not necessarily West Virginia there. All right, Chris, we'll save our who or what are we talking about because of the way you teed up um, what we'll be talking about from this game afterwards. So probably not a whole lot to do to wrap up on this one here. You mentioned the players. I mentioned a couple players. We'll see. Matchups for West Virginia should be in their corner, and they should be able to check the boxes as they want there. Otherwise, tune into the post game podcast. Right? What do you have coming up
Yeah.
here to finish up the week?
I've got some more recruiting news coming up, baseball, basketball, football. I mean, it's all the visits are happening right now. We'll have some position group power rankings going up also today, so keep an eye out for the usual stuff leading into the game.
Hope you got the 75% off. If not, wait until it's, normal price for the rest of the year. You don't want to miss anything behind the paywall. Fresh set by the numbers team and player previews coming up. Until then, I am Mike Casaza.
And I'm Chris Anderson.
We will talk to you then.